At 2 a.m. in a cabin buried under 3 feet of Oregon snow, Daniel Carter did the one thing he had sworn on his daughter's life he would never do again. He stood up, crossed a freezing room, and walked toward the one woman who could destroy everything he'd rebuilt. His boss, Victoria Hale. The woman who never smiled at anyone. And she had just whispered 5 words that shattered every rule between them. "Come in, I'm freezing." A single father who promised he'd never fall again. A heater dead at the worst hour of the night. One bed. If you're watching right now, drop a comment and tell me what city you're from. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. And if a good story still means something to you, subscribe and stay with me to the very end, because I promise you nothing about this night is what it seems. Daniel Carter ripped his phone off the charger so hard the cable whipped across the counter and knocked a coffee mug into the sink. "No," he said into the phone. "No, you listen to me. I don't care what the schedule says. I promised her." On the other end, a voice he'd learned to fear over 11 months kept talking. Calm. Cold. Measured. The voice of a woman who had never once in Daniel's memory raised it. "Mr. Carter." A pause. "The Whitmore account is worth more than your entire team's salaries combined. If we lose the site walkthrough, we lose the contract. If we lose the contract, I lose 3 architects. Do the math." "I'm doing the math," Daniel said, dropping his voice, glancing down the hallway toward the small bedroom with the nightlight glowing under the door. "The math says my 6-year-old daughter has a father who missed her last 2 birthdays because of this company. The math says tonight I told her I'd be here." "Then I suggest," Victoria Hale said, "you find someone to watch her. We leave at 5. The line went dead. Daniel stood there in his kitchen in his socks, the phone still warm against his ear, listening to nothing. "Daddy." He turned. Emma was in the doorway in her dinosaur pajamas, one sock on one sock, gone her hair a tangled halo. She was holding the book. Their book. The one with the worn spine because they'd read it 400 times. "Hey, baby." He got down on one knee fast the way he always did, so he'd be eye level with her instead of towering. "You're supposed to be asleep. You were yelling." "I wasn't yelling. You were using your yelling quiet voice." She climbed the last 2 steps and pressed the book against his chest. "You promised the dragon one." And there it was. The thing that undid him every single time. Not the yelling, not the deadlines. This. A 6-year-old holding a book to his chest, absolutely certain that her father kept his promises, because so far, barely by his fingernails he had. "I know I did," Daniel said. "Are you going to go away again?" He looked at her. He thought about lying. Parents lie all the time. It's practically the job. But Emma had her mother's eyes, and her mother had left, and Daniel had promised himself he would never be the second person in this child's life to say one thing and do another. "I have to go for 1 day," he said. 1. And then I'm coming right back." Her lip did the thing. The tremble. "You said 1 day at Christmas and it was 5. This is different." "How?" "Because if I don't go, I lose my job. And if I lose my job, we lose this apartment. And if we lose this apartment, I don't know where we go." That's what he wanted to say. Instead, he tapped the book. "Because tonight before I go anywhere, we're reading The Dragon one, twice. And in the morning, Grandma's coming and you 2 are going to make those terrible pancakes she likes." "They're not terrible. They're a little terrible." Emma almost smiled. Almost. She was 6 going on 40, this kid. She'd had to grow up faster than any child should, and Daniel carried that guilt around like a stone in his shoe. "Okay," she said finally. 2 times. "And you do the dragon voice." "I always do the dragon voice." "Do it better." He carried her back to bed. He read The Dragon one twice. He did the dragon voice better. And somewhere in the middle of the second reading, she fell asleep on his arm, and he sat there in the dark for a long time, doing the thing he did every night, memorizing her face like he might forget it. At 4:45 a.m., his mother let herself in with the spare key. "You look like hell," she told him. "Thanks, Ma." "You still working for that woman?" She said that woman the way some people say the flu. "For now." His mother folded her arms. She was 71 and had raised 3 boys alone after their father walked out, and she had opinions about people who put work before their children. Opinions she had shared at volume more than once. "A man shouldn't have to choose between feeding his kid and raising his kid," she said. "No," Daniel agreed, pulling on his coat. "He shouldn't." He kissed Emma's forehead one more time. He kissed his mother's cheek, and he walked out into the freezing dark to meet the woman he liked least in the entire world. Victoria Hale was already in the car when he got to the lot. Of course she was. She was always already there, already prepared, already 3 steps ahead, sitting in the passenger seat of the company SUV, with a tablet glowing in her lap, and not one strand of dark hair out of place at 5 in the morning. Daniel got in the driver's seat and said nothing. She said nothing. They pulled out of the lot in a silence so complete he could hear the tires peeling wet asphalt off the road. For the first 40 minutes, the only words spoken were hers, and all of them were about the Whitmore account, the scope, the timeline, the client's temperament. Daniel answered in the fewest syllables possible. He was good at his job. That was the thing that made all of this so maddening. He was good. He'd designed 3 of the firm's most awarded projects in under a year. And still, every conversation with Victoria Hale felt like a performance review. He was failing in real time. "You disagree with the north-facing elevation," she said suddenly, not looking up from her tablet. Daniel blinked. "What?" "On the Whitmore drafts. You initialed your approval, but you changed the window ratios on the 3rd revision without a note. You only do that when you disagree, and you've decided it's not worth the argument." Now she looked up. "So argue." He kept his eyes on the road. "You want me to argue with you at 5 in the morning on a Saturday. I want you to do your job, which is design, not diplomacy. If the elevation is wrong, say it's wrong." He gripped the wheel. "Fine. She wanted it, she'd get it." "The elevation's wrong," Daniel said. "Whitmore's got kids, 3 of them. That north face is where the family room goes, and you've got it swallowing light for 8 months of the year for the sake of a symmetry nobody's going to notice from the street. It's a beautiful drawing. It's a lousy home. Nobody wants to raise a family in a museum." The silence that followed was different from the earlier silence, sharper. "You think I don't know the difference between a house and a home?" Victoria said. Flat, not a question. "I think you draw beautiful houses," Daniel said. "I didn't say anything about homes." He expected her to bite his head off. He'd braced for it. Instead, she turned back to her tablet, and for a while there was only the hum of the road and the wipers dragging across a windshield that had started at some point to collect the first soft flakes of snow. "Change the ratios," she said eventually. "Send me the revision Monday." Daniel glanced at her surprised. "You're agreeing with me?" "Don't make it weird, Carter." And that for one strange second almost made him laugh. The snow got serious around hour 3. They'd left the highway an hour back for the county road that wound up into the mountains toward the Whitmore build site. And the light had gone that flat gray that means the sky is about to empty itself on you. The flakes stopped being pretty and started being a wall. "This is fine," Daniel said mostly to himself, both hands on the wheel now. "You've said that 3 times." "It's still true 3 times. The SUV's tires slid just a little, just a shimmy, as they came around a bend, and Victoria's hand shot out and gripped the door handle. It was the first crack Daniel had ever seen in her. A small one, a reflex. But he saw it. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine." "You grabbed the—" "I said I'm fine." He eased off the gas. The wipers were losing the fight. His phone mounted on the dash had lost signal 12 minutes ago. The little bars just gone replaced by a gray SOS he didn't like the look of. "Call the site office," he said. "I lost signal before you did." Great. They crawled up the mountain for another 20 minutes, the road disappearing under white, and then his headlights caught something up ahead. A small structure set back off the road, a porch light burning weakly against the dark. "That the build site?" Daniel asked. Victoria was already checking the coordinates on her tablet, which mercifully still had the offline map cached. "No, the site's another 9 miles up." She was quiet a second. "That's the guest cabin. Whitmore keeps it for the crew. We were supposed to stay there tonight and drive the last stretch in the morning." Daniel looked at the road ahead. What had been a road? It was a river of snow, now no shoulders, no markings. The drop-off on the right side vanishing into gray nothing. "We're not driving another 9 miles up that," he said. "No," Victoria agreed. "We're not." It was the first thing they'd fully agreed on all day. The cabin was locked, but there was a key in a lockbox on the porch rail, and Victoria had the code because Victoria had every code, and they got inside just as the last light drained out of the sky. It was one room. That was the first problem. Daniel clocked it the second he stepped in and stamped the snow off his boots. One room, one small kitchenette against the far wall. One couch that was really more of a love seat. One wood stove, and one bed. 1. He stood in the doorway with snow melting off his shoulders and stared at that single bed, the way a man stares at a bill he can't pay. "There's supposed to be 2 beds, Victoria said behind him, and for the first time all day, she sounded less than certain. "Well, there's 1. The listing said 2. The listing lied. She set her bag down with a precision that told him she was annoyed and refusing to show it. "You'll take the bed. I'll take the couch. You're not sleeping on that couch, it's 4 feet long. I'm 5'6". I'm not gonna make my boss sleep folded in half on a love seat. "Victoria, I have some home training." "Then you sleep folded in half," she said. "And stop calling it a problem. It's a logistics issue. Everything is a logistics issue if you stop being dramatic about it." Daniel opened his mouth to answer, and that's when he noticed the second problem. The cold. Not the outside cold that had followed them in through the door. A different cold. The cold that lives inside a building that has not been heated in a long time. He crossed to the wood stove and pulled the little door open. Cold ash-dead coals, nothing that had burned in weeks. Then he found the wall unit, the electric heater that was supposed to keep the place livable, and he pressed the button, and the button lit up, and the unit made a sound like a man clearing his throat one last time before dying. Then nothing. He pressed it again. Nothing. "Tell me that's not the heater," Victoria said. Daniel crouched down, pulled the panel, looked at the guts of the thing. He wasn't an electrician, but he'd renovated enough old buildings to know a burned-out heating element when he was staring at one black and cracked and finished. "That's the heater," he said. "Fix it." "I can't fix it, it's dead." "You renovate buildings. I design buildings, I don't resurrect them." He stood up, wiping his hands. "This element's gone. There's no fixing it tonight, not without a part I don't have and a hardware store 9 snowed-in miles from here." Victoria walked to the window. Outside, the storm had gone from serious to biblical. The flakes coming sideways now, the porch light barely punching through it. She stood there with her back to him, and Daniel watched her shoulders, the set of them. The tension, and he understood something he hadn't understood all day. She was scared, not of him, not of the cold exactly, of not being in control. This was a woman whose entire life ran on being 3 steps ahead of everything, and the storm had just taken all her steps away, and she was standing at a dark window in a dying cabin with an employee she barely trusted, and there was not one thing she could do about any of it. "How cold does it get up here at night?" she asked, quiet. Daniel didn't want to answer honestly. He did anyway. "Cold," he said. "It's gonna drop fast now that the sun's down. We've got the wood stove, I can get a fire going that'll take the worst edge off. But this is an old building. It leaks heat. It's gonna be a long night." She turned around, and for 1 second, just one, the boss was gone. The cold, brilliant, untouchable director of Hale Architecture was gone, and what stood in her place was just a tired woman, a long way from home, who hadn't planned for this. Then the mask came back. He watched it happen, watched her put it back on like a coat. "Then get the fire going," she said. I'll find blankets. He got the fire going. It took 20 minutes, and most of the split wood stacked by the door in language he was glad Emma wasn't around to hear. But he got a fire going in that old stove, and slowly, grudgingly, the small room began to hold a little warmth near the middle of it. Victoria found blankets. 2. Thin ones, the kind that smell like a closet, and don't do much but 2 of them. She found a bottle of something in a cabinet, cheap whiskey some crew member had left behind, and she found 2 mismatched mugs, and she poured a finger into each without asking whether he wanted it, and handed him one. "I don't really drink," Daniel said. "Tonight you do. It'll help you not think about how cold you are." He took it. They sat on the floor, near the stove backs against the love seat, a careful 3 feet of space between them, and for a while, neither of them said anything at all. The fire popped. The wind screamed against the windows. And Daniel Carter, who had spent 11 months certain he knew exactly who Victoria Hale was, a machine, a resume, a cold email that walked around in expensive shoes, sat next to her in the firelight and realized he didn't know one true thing about her. Not one. "Can I ask you something?" he said, "and you don't fire me for it?" "Depends what it is." "Why do you do it?" She turned her head. "Do what?" "The whole thing. The ice. The distance. Nobody at the firm's ever seen you laugh. You know they call you the Glacier." "I've heard the Glacier. I've also heard worse." "So why?" Victoria looked into the fire for a long time. Long enough that Daniel figured he'd overstepped, that the mug of whiskey had made him stupid that Monday he'd be updating his resume. He'd started to open his mouth to walk it back. "Because it's easier," she said. He waited. "When I took over that firm," she said, still looking at the fire, "I was 31, a woman, younger than half the men I was suddenly in charge of. Do you know what happens to a woman like that if she smiles too much, if she's warm, if she lets people in?" She took a slow sip. "They stop hearing your ideas and start deciding how they feel about you. So you learn to give them nothing to feel. You become a wall. And walls don't get pushed around." Daniel sat with that. "That sounds lonely," he said. Not unkindly. Victoria's mouth did something complicated. Not a smile. The ghost of where a smile used to live. "Everyone's lonely, Carter," she said. "Some of us are just honest about the address." The fire popped again. And outside the storm kept coming, and the temperature kept dropping, and the 2 of them sat there in a dying cabin with 3 feet of careful space between them, a distance that had felt an hour ago like the most natural thing in the world. It was starting very quietly to feel like the hardest work either of them had ever done. Muốn mình viết tiếp Part 2 không? Mình sẽ giữ nguyên phong cách này, tăng đối thoại giàu cảm xúc, giảm mô tả cảnh và đẩy kịch tính lên, đúng như dàn ý nhiệt độ tụt sâu lửa yếu dần và bức tường giữa hai người bắt đầu vỡ. Bạn chỉ cần nhận viết Part 2 là mình làm ngay. The whiskey was gone before either of them noticed they'd been drinking it. Victoria set her empty mug down on the floor between them, and the small clink of ceramic on wood was the loudest sound in the room for a moment. Then she pulled her knees up under the thin blanket and wrapped her arms around them, and Daniel pretended not to notice that she'd started very slightly to shake. "You cold?" he asked. "I'm fine." "You keep saying that." "Because I keep being fine." He almost smiled. He fed another split log into the stove instead, watching the flames climb up the fresh bark. And he did the math in his head the way he'd done math all day. There were maybe 15 logs left stacked by the door. It was a little after 8. Sunrise came around 6:30 this time of year, up in these mountains, which meant they had about 10 hours of dark ahead of them, and not nearly enough wood to burn a real fire through all of it. He decided not to tell her that. "So the Glacier's got a soft spot for cheap whiskey," he said instead. "That's the real scandal. That's what I'm putting in the company newsletter Monday. You put that in the newsletter, Carter, and I'll put your Christmas bonus in the shredder." "I don't get a Christmas bonus." "Exactly. Imagine how much worse it could get." And this time she almost smiled too, and Daniel caught it, the corner of her mouth, twitching before she pulled it back down where she kept it. And he thought, not for the first time that night, that he had spent 11 months building an entire person out of nothing. He'd decided who Victoria Hale was on his second day at the firm when she'd rejected his portfolio revisions with a single line of red text and no explanation, and he'd been adding bricks to that wall ever since. The cold one. The heartless one. The one who didn't have a life, because how could anyone that cold have a life? And now he was sitting 3 feet from her while she made a joke about his Christmas bonus, and none of the bricks fit anymore. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You already got one free question. This is getting expensive. You have a kid." It wasn't a question, so he didn't treat it like one. He just nodded once and looked into the fire. "How old?" she said. "6, Emma. She's 6. He felt the smile come up his face before he could decide whether to let it. "She's 6 going on 60. Smartest person I know. She corrects my grammar. She corrected my grammar this morning actually before I left. Told me I said less when I should have said fewer. She's right. You do that." "Oh, you noticed." "I notice everything, Carter. It's the whole job." He laughed short and real, and the sound surprised both of them. It didn't belong in that room. It belonged to some other version of this night one where they were friends, one where the heater worked, and there were 2 beds, and none of this careful 3 feet of space existed. "Her mother's not around," Victoria said. Again, not a question. A thing she already knew. Daniel's jaw tightened just a little. "How do you know that? You listed a single dependent on your benefits enrollment, no spouse. And you flinched just now when I said her mother. You flinch when it's still open. People stop flinching when it's closed." He turned and looked at her fully, then the firelight moving on the side of her face, and he felt something cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. "You read my benefits enrollment." "I read everyone's benefits enrollment. It's my company." She held his eyes. "Don't make it weird. You keep saying that." "Because you keep making things weird." But there was no heat in it, and he let it go because she was right, and because the truth was, he didn't want to fight with her. It was 9 o'clock in a snowstorm, 9 miles from anywhere, and fighting with her was the last thing in the world he wanted to do. And that realization sat in his chest like a swallowed stone. 2 years, he said finally. She left 2 years ago. Emma was 4. Victoria didn't say she was sorry. He was grateful for that. Everybody said they were sorry, and it never meant anything, and she seemed to understand that, because instead she just waited quiet, letting the silence hold the space where the sorry would have gone. "She met somebody," Daniel said. "That's the short version. There's a long version, but the long version is just the short version with more crying in it. She met somebody, and she decided the life we built wasn't the life she wanted. And one Tuesday, I came home and there was a note on the counter, and half the closet was empty, and my daughter was standing in the hallway in her socks asking me where Mommy went." The fire popped. He watched a spark drift up and die. "You want to know the part that still gets me," he said. "It's not that she left me. People fall out of love. I get it happens. I'm a grown man. It's that she left her. She left Emma. She left a 4-year-old, and she barely looked back. Calls on birthdays. Sometimes. And I stood in that hallway holding my kid, and I made myself a promise." "What promise?" Daniel looked at her. "That Emma would never wonder if I was going to stay," he said. "Not for 1 second of her life. Her whole world got cut in half in one afternoon, and I decided the half that was left was going to be so solid, so sure, so there that she'd never once have to lie awake wondering if her dad was going to disappear too." The room was quiet except for the wind. "That's why you fought me this morning," Victoria said slowly. "On the phone, about the trip. That's why I fought you this morning. You told her you'd be there tonight. I told her I'd be there tonight. And instead, I'm here in a freezing cabin in a snowstorm with the boss He stopped himself. "With the boss, you what?" "Nothing. With the boss you can't stand," she finished for him, and there was something almost wry in it, almost soft. "It's all right. I know what they call me. I know what you thought when you walked into that car this morning. I've got a mirror, Carter. I'm not stupid. I never thought you were stupid. No, you thought I was empty. She said it without accusation, like she was reading a fact off a page. That's fine too. It's what I built. You can't be angry when people believe the thing you spent 10 years constructing. Daniel didn't have an answer for that. It was almost 10 o'clock when his phone buzzed. It buzzed exactly once, a single hard vibration against the floorboards, and Daniel dove for it so fast he nearly put his hand in the stove. One bar. One single trembling bar of signal come from nowhere. Some freak gap in the storm, and there was a text on the screen from his mother that had finally punched through, and his heart dropped through the floor before he even read it. Emma won't sleep. Keeps asking for you, running a little fever. She's okay, but she wants her dad. Call if you can. The text was 2 hours old. Daniel. Victoria was watching his face. What is it? Emma's sick. He was already up on his knees holding the phone toward the window, toward the ceiling, toward anywhere, chasing that one bar like a man chasing water in a desert. She's got a fever, she's asking for me, and I can't. The bar died. I can't get the call to connect. Come on. Give it to me. It's not gonna... Give it to me, Carter. She took the phone out of his hand and she stood and she walked to the far corner of the cabin, the north corner, the one near the window, and she held the phone up high and turned in a slow circle with a focus so total it was almost frightening. There, she said. Hold this. Don't move it. Not an inch. He held it. She pulled her own phone from her bag, powered it fully off and back on, resetting the radio. She said, sometimes it grabs a tower, the other one can't. And for 90 seconds, the two of them stood in the freezing corner of a dying cabin, two phones held to the ceiling saying nothing, willing a signal out of a blizzard. Daniel's phone rang. It rang out. It was dialing his mother, and he snatched it to his ear and pressed his back to the wall, like he could push himself closer to the tower through sheer want. Ma, can you hear me? Is she okay? The line crackled. His mother's voice came through in pieces, breaking apart and coming back. Neil, you there? Can barely. Ma, is Emma okay? Fine, she's fine. Fever's already down, just a little bug. She was scared, that's all she wanted. Hear your voice. Put her on. Ma, please put her on. A shuffling sound, a long crackling nothing, and then small and thick with sleep, a voice that reached into Daniel's chest and closed a fist around his whole heart. Daddy. Hey, baby. His voice cracked in half on the second word. Hey, I'm here. I'm right here. Grandma says you've got a fever, huh? My head's hot. I know it is, but you're gonna feel all better by morning, I promise. You know how I know. How? 'Cause you're the toughest kid in the whole world. Tougher than the dragon. You know that. A tiny, feverish, sleepy laugh. Tougher than the dragon. That's my girl. Now you close your eyes for Grandma, and when you wake up, you make those terrible pancakes, and I'll be home before you can even finish 'em. Deal. They're not terrible. They're a little terrible. Deal. Deal. A pause. Daddy. Yeah, baby. You didn't disappear. Daniel shut his eyes. And in the freezing corner of that cabin with a woman he'd spent 11 months hating, watching him from 4 feet away, a single tear cut down the side of his face, and he didn't bother to wipe it. No, baby, he said. I didn't disappear. I'm never gonna disappear. Not ever. Now go to sleep. The line broke apart into static, and then into nothing, and the one bar was gone as fast as it had come. But it didn't matter. He'd gotten what he needed. He lowered the phone with a hand that wasn't quite steady, and he stood there in the corner, breathing like he'd run a mile. She's okay, Victoria said quietly. She's okay. He wiped his face now, fast embarrassed. Sorry. Don't. I don't usually, Carter. Her voice was low and even, and unlike anything he'd heard from her all day. Don't apologize for that. Not for that. Do you understand me? Whatever you do tonight, don't you dare apologize for that. He looked at her, and there was something in her face he couldn't read. something that had cracked open while he was on the phone, something raw and old and painful, and it was gone almost before he saw it. But he saw it, and he knew that she knew he'd seen it. They went back to the fire. The room was colder now. He could see his breath when he leaned away from the stove. "You want to know why I really brought you on this trip?" Victoria said. Daniel looked up. "You brought me because I'm the lead on Whitmore. Marcus is the lead on Whitmore, on paper. I moved you to lead 3 weeks ago and didn't announce it." She was looking at the fire again, that 1,000-yard place she went, when she was about to say something true. "I brought you because I've watched you for 11 months, and you're the best designer I've got, and you don't know it, and everyone else in that building is so busy managing their careers that they've forgotten how to make anything that matters. You still make things that matter. I brought you because I needed to remember what that looked like." Daniel sat very still. "That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me," he said. "That's also the only nice thing you've ever said to me. I'm gonna need a minute. Don't get used to it." "Oh, believe me." But she wasn't laughing now. She'd gone somewhere else, somewhere behind her own eyes, and Daniel had learned enough about her in the last 3 hours to know that when Victoria Hale went quiet like that, it wasn't emptiness. It was the opposite. It was too full. It was a woman standing at the edge of saying something she'd never said out loud, deciding whether the fall was worth it. It was almost 11 when she jumped. "I was engaged once," Victoria said. Daniel didn't move, didn't breathe. He'd spent enough years around wounded people, around Emma, around his own broken self after the note on the counter to know that the wrong word here, any word, could close the door forever. "His name was David," she said. "We were together 6 years. He was warm. God, he was warm. Everybody loved him. He was the kind of man who remembered your barista's name and asked about her kids. And I was already the way I am, already all edges, and somehow he loved me anyway, or I thought he did. And for 6 years, I let myself believe I could be a person who got to have that, who got to be warm back, who got to let the wall down for one man in the whole world." The fire cracked. She didn't flinch. "We picked a date. I bought the dress. My mother cried at the fitting, which my mother doesn't cry so." A breath. "And 11 days before the wedding, he sat me down at our kitchen table and he told me he'd met someone 6 weeks earlier at a conference. He told me he'd fought it, and he couldn't anymore, and he was sorry, he was so sorry, and he needed to go be with her because life was short, and you have to be honest, and—" She stopped. "And I sat at that table," she said, quieter now, "and I watched a man I'd given 6 years choose someone he'd known for 6 weeks, and I understood something that I have never once let myself forget since. That being warm doesn't protect you. That being open doesn't protect you. That you can love someone with everything you have and give them every soft part of yourself. And one Tuesday, they'll sit you down at a kitchen table and choose somebody else, and there is not one thing your love can do to stop it." Daniel felt the floor tilt, because he knew that story. He knew it from the inside. It was his story told in a different voice, in a woman's voice, and he understood in one lightning strike of a second that he and Victoria Hale had been carrying the exact same wound in exactly opposite directions. His had made him fold everything he had around a little girl in dinosaur pajamas, and hers had made her fold everything she had into a wall so high nobody could ever get close enough to sit her down at a kitchen table again. "That's why the ice," he said softly. "That's why the ice. You built the whole thing so no one could ever choose someone else over you." "I built the whole thing so no one could ever choose me at all," she corrected. "You can't be unchosen if you never let yourself be chosen. It's very tidy. It's the tidiest thing I've ever built." Her voice was steady, but her hands wrapped around her knees had started to shake harder now, and it wasn't only the cold. "You want to know the joke, Carter? I've spent 10 years being the most controlled person in every room I walk into. And I've never once, not for a single day, not felt the way I felt at that kitchen table. The wall doesn't keep the feeling out. I found that out too late. It just keeps everybody else from seeing it." For a long moment, neither of them said anything. The wind had picked up outside, howling now, a real animal sound, and the fire had burned down lower than Daniel liked, and he knew he should feed it another log, but he couldn't move because the woman beside him had just handed him something. He was fairly sure she'd never handed anyone, and it felt like the whole night would shatter if he breathed wrong. He was an idiot, Daniel said finally. Victoria let out a sound that was half a laugh and half something with sharper edges. You don't have to. I'm not being nice. I'm being right. He turned to face her. He had 6 years with somebody who buys the wall and the whiskey and the mismatched mugs, and he traded it for 6 weeks of new and exciting, and I promise you, Victoria, wherever that man is tonight, some part of him knows he made the worst trade of his life. Because I've met the other kind of woman. I married the other kind of woman. The one who wants new and exciting. And I'll tell you what nobody tells you. New and exciting always finds somebody newer. Always. But the woman who builds a wall. The woman who's loyal enough to be that scared of being left. That woman doesn't leave. That's the whole point of the wall. You built a fortress because you were the kind of person who'd never walk out of one. He didn't lose an ice queen. He lost the only person who was ever gonna stay. Victoria stared at him. And for the first time in 11 months, for the first time, Daniel would later be certain. In a very long time, her eyes filled all the way right to the edge. 2 bright lines of firelight standing in them, and she didn't blink them back, and she didn't look away, and she didn't put the mask back on. You're going to be a problem, she whispered. Aren't you? I've been called worse. By me. You've been called worse by me. Specifically. See, now that's the whiskey talking, 'cause that was almost funny. And she laughed. She actually laughed, a real one this time, cracked and wet and startled out of her. One hand flying up to her mouth like she could catch it and put it back, and the sound of it filled the freezing room like the fire never had. And Daniel Carter sat there and watched Victoria Hale laugh, and understood that he was in a great deal of trouble. Then she stopped laughing. Because she shivered hard, a full-body shudder that rattled her teeth audibly, and the laugh turned into something else, and Daniel's whole body went on alert. It was almost midnight. He checked. And when he looked back at the stove, his stomach dropped because the fire was low, really low now, and the stack of wood by the door had gone from 15 logs to 4, while he wasn't counting 4 logs and 6 hours of dark, still to go, and the temperature in the room had dropped low enough that he could no longer feel his own feet. How long's it been dropping like this? He said, sharp, all business now. What? The temperature. When did you start shaking? Really shaking, not just cold. An hour ago, I don't know. I stopped noticing. Her words came slower than they should have. Just slightly, just enough. It's fine, it's just cold, everyone's cold. Victoria, look at me. He'd shifted onto his knees, taking her face in the pallor of it, the blue starting at her lips, the way her eyes weren't quite tracking him. He'd learned first aid for Emma. He knew what the beginning of hypothermia looked like, and he was looking at it. How many fingers am I holding up? Don't be ridiculous. How many fingers? 2. It's 2, Carter. I'm not a child. It's 3. Silence. The wind screamed. The fire guttered. And Victoria Hale looked down at her own shaking hands like they belonged to a stranger, and when she looked back up, the fear in her face was real and total and stripped of every wall she'd ever built. Oh, she said very quietly. That's not good, is it? No, Daniel said, already moving, already up and grabbing both thin blankets, already doing math faster than he'd done it all day, running through the 4 logs in the 6 hours, and the blue creeping into her lips, and arriving at the one answer he'd been avoiding since the second he walked in and saw that single bed. No, it's not good, and we're gonna have to do something about it, and you're not gonna like it, and I need you to trust me anyway. Daniel. Do you trust me? And Victoria Hale, the glacier, the woman who trusted no one, who'd built 10 years of fortress specifically so she'd never have to answer that question, looked up at him through the failing firelight, shaking so hard now she could barely hold his eyes, and gave him the truest word she'd said all night. Yes. Yes was all he needed. Daniel moved like a man who'd stopped debating with himself because debating was a luxury and Victoria's lips were going the wrong color. He took both blankets and shook them out and folded them together into one, doubling the thickness, and he pulled the love seat cushions off and threw them on the floor in front of the stove, closer than he'd normally dare, close enough that if a spark jumped, they'd both feel it. "Get down here," he said. "Right in front of the fire. Now. Daniel, I can—" "You can't. That's the whole problem. You can't feel your hands, and you just told me 2 fingers were 3, and the reason you're arguing with me right now, instead of doing what I say, is that the cold's already getting into your head, and I need you to hear me." He crouched in front of her, took both her hands in both of his, and the shock of how cold they were ran straight up his arms. "You are not in trouble at work right now. There is no firm right now. There's no boss and no employee and no Whitmore account and no wall. There's a fire that's going to be out in a couple hours and a woman who's freezing to death slower than she thinks she is. That's it. That's the whole world. Get down here." She got down there. He wrapped the doubled blanket around her shoulders and pulled it tight, and he sat her right up against the front of the stove, close enough to feel the heat on her face, and he started rubbing her hands between his not gentle, hard friction, the way you're supposed to. The way the first aid course had drilled into him when Emma was a baby and he was a terrified single father who didn't know what a fever meant. "Your hands are like ice," she said, and her voice had that slow, dreamy edge that scared him more than anything. "So are yours. That's the point. We're gonna fix yours first." "You're shaking too." "I'm fine." "Now who keeps saying that?" He almost laughed. He didn't because he was watching her too closely, cataloging every second of her, the color of her lips, the focus in her eyes, the strength of her grip when he told her to squeeze his fingers. "Squeeze," he said. "Hard as you can." She squeezed. It was weak, weaker than it should have been, and they both felt it, and something flickered across her face that he recognized because he'd felt it himself in that hallway 2 years ago, holding a 4-year-old. The specific terror of a person who has always been in control, discovering all at once that the thing happening to them is bigger than their control. "That's bad, isn't it?" she said. "The squeeze. It's not great. It's gonna get better. Keep working your hands. Open, close, don't stop." "Talk to me," she said suddenly. "What? You said stay awake. So talk to me. If I stop talking, that's when you worry, right? That's what they say. So talk to me and make me talk back." Her teeth were chattering around the words. "Tell me something. Tell me anything. Tell me about your kid. Tell me about the pancakes." So he told her about the pancakes. He told her how his mother made them too thick and too dense and slightly burned on one side every single time, and how Emma had decided years ago that this was the correct and proper way for a pancake to be, and now refused to eat any other kind, and had once sent back a plate of perfect fluffy pancakes at a diner because they were wrong and not real pancakes, and how the waitress had stared at him, and he'd had to explain to a grown woman that his daughter would only eat inferior pancakes, and could she please make them worse. Victoria laughed. It was thin and it shook, but it was a laugh, and every laugh was a heartbeat, and every heartbeat was blood moving. And Daniel would have told pancake stories until the sun came up if it kept her here with him. "She sounds like you," Victoria said. "She's better than me. That's the goal, right? You make one that's better than you, and you don't screw it up too bad on the way." He kept working her hands. "Squeeze again." She squeezed. It was stronger. "There it is," he breathed. "There you go. That's better. You feel that blood's coming back." "I feel it." "Wiggle your toes. Can you feel your toes?" A pause. Too long a pause. "No." And Daniel's stomach dropped again, because feet were harder than hands. Feet were further from the heart, and he looked at the 4 logs by the door, and the low guttering fire, and did the math one more time, and arrived finally at the thing he'd been circling all night. The thing he'd known since he walked in the door, and saw one bed, and he made himself say it out loud. "Okay," he said. "Here's what's happening, and I need you to not fight me, because there's no time to fight me. That fire's got maybe 2 hours of real heat left, and we don't have enough wood to make it to morning. Your hands are coming back, but your feet aren't, And the only heat source in this room that's not gonna burn out in 2 hours is body heat. Mine. And you need it. Victoria stopped moving her hands. I want to keep you alive till sunrise. That's the entire complete whole list of what I want. He held her eyes. I'm gonna get in that blanket with you. Back to front, my back to the fire. You against me, and we share what heat we've got, and we ride this out till the sun comes up and the storm breaks, and we can get the car down the mountain. That's it. That's the plan. That's the only plan there is. For a second, she just looked at him, and Daniel braced for the fight, the sarcasm, the wall coming back up, the... Don't make it weird, Carter. It didn't come. Instead, she said in the smallest voice he'd heard from her all night, It's been a long time since anyone got that close. And he understood that she wasn't talking about tonight. She wasn't talking about the cold. She was talking about David and the kitchen table, and 10 years of a fortress with no visitors, and the specific private terror of letting a human body up against her own, after a decade of making sure none ever could. I know, he said gently. I know it has. And I'm not going to make it mean anything you don't want it to mean. This is a man keeping his boss from freezing to death in a cabin. That's all it has to be. Tomorrow, we drive down the mountain, and I go back to changing window ratios, and you go back to being the glacier, and we never talk about it again, if that's what you want. But right now, tonight, I need you to let me close because the alternative is a whole lot worse. And I've got a 6-year-old at home who needs me to make it down this mountain in one piece. And so do you, whether you know it yet or not. That got her. He watched it get her. The 6-year-old. The reminder that he wasn't doing this to get close to her. He was doing it because he had a child who needed her father home, and there was nothing in that she could be afraid of. Okay, she whispered. Okay. He got in the blanket. It was at first the most awkward thing either of them had ever done. Two adults who'd spent the day arguing about window ratios now pressed spine to chest under a doubled closet blanket on couch cushions in front of a dying fire. He kept his arms careful. He kept everything careful. He put his back to the stove so the heat would come through him to her, and he wrapped the blanket around them both and tucked it under her, and he held still, and for a long moment neither of them breathed. Then she stopped shaking quite so hard. Better? He asked quiet near her ear. Warmer. Feet. Still can't feel them. They'll come back. Give it time. Keep talking to me. It's midnight, we've got maybe 6 hours of dark, and you're gonna stay awake for every one of them. You hear me? No sleeping till the sun's up. If you feel sleepy, you tell me and we talk louder. That's not how sleep works, Carter. Tonight it is. She was quiet a second. He could feel her breathing slow, and even against his arms, could feel the exact moment the worst of the shaking eased, and something in his own chest unclenched that he hadn't realized had been clenched. You're good at this, she said. At what? Keeping people alive, keeping people calm. You did it on the phone with your daughter, and you're doing it with me. A pause. You'd have made a good doctor. I wanted to be one. She turned her head slightly. Really? Long time ago, before Emma. Before the divorce, before all of it. I was pre-med for about 1.5 years in college. He watched the fire over her shoulder. Then my dad got sick and money got real, and pre-med's a long road and architecture's a shorter one, and I made a choice. I don't regret it. I love what I do. But yeah, there was a version of me that wore a white coat. Why'd you never say, because nobody ever asked? You're the first person in about 10 years to ask me what I wanted to be. He said it plainly, no self-pity in it, just true. That's the thing about being a single dad. Everybody asks how she's doing. Nobody asks how you're doing. You stop being a person with a past. You become a function, a ride, a wallet, a guy who does the dragon voice. And that's fine. That's the job I signed up for it, and I'd sign up for it 1,000 more times. But you asked me what I wanted to be, and I couldn't remember the last time anyone did. The fire popped. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. I ask because I noticed, she said finally, the way you were with her on the phone. You didn't panic. You made her feel like the whole world was fine when you were standing in a freezing corner, terrified out of your mind. That's a specific kind of person. That's a person who's learned to hold their own fear so somebody smaller doesn't have to. A beat. I know that person. I had to become that person at 12, Chad. Daniel went still. What happened at 12? And there it was again, that pause, that edge, that woman standing at the lip of a thing she'd never said out loud, deciding whether to jump. It was almost 1 a.m. now, and the fire was low, and there was nothing left in the world but the two of them and the storm. And maybe that was why she jumped. Maybe you can only say some things in the dark to a back when the person can't see your face. My mother got sick when I was 12, Victoria said. The kind of sick that doesn't get better. And my father was... he was there. Technically, he paid the bills, but he was the kind of man who couldn't be in the room with a sick person, couldn't handle it, disappeared into his work and left it to me. So I did it. I was 12, and I learned to read a medication schedule, and I learned to keep my voice calm when she was scared, and I learned to hold my own fear so she wouldn't see it, so she could rest because she was already carrying enough. Her voice was steady, but Daniel could feel her heart against his arm, and it was going too fast. She died when I was 15, and by then I was so good at holding everything, at being the calm one, at never letting anyone see the fear, that I just never stopped. I built a career on it. I built a whole self on it. And you sit there tonight and do the same exact thing for your daughter, and I watch you, and I think that's a person who found a way to make that skill into love. And I found a way to make it into a wall. Same skill. We just aimed it in different directions. The whole room seemed to hold its breath. Victoria, Daniel said quietly. Don't. I'm not going to say sorry. I know you hate that. Good. I'm going to say something worse. He waited a second. I'm going to say I understand you. And I think that might be the first time in a long time anybody actually has. And I think that scares you more than the cold does. She didn't answer. But her hand, the one he'd been warming, the one that could feel again, now found his hand under the blanket and held it and didn't let go. They stayed like that for a while. The fire crackled and settled. Outside, the wind had shifted from a scream to a long, low moan, still fierce but different, and Daniel filed that away without knowing why. It was almost 1:30 when she said, Tell me about the divorce, the real version, the one with the crying. You don't want to hear that. I told you about my mother. I told you about David. You've got my whole file open, Carter. Fair's fair. So he told her. He told her about how it hadn't been sudden, not really how the truth was. He'd seen it coming for a year, and told himself he hadn't. The way you do, how his wife Rachel had gotten quiet, and then busy, and then somewhere else, even when she was in the room, and how he'd worked harder and tried harder, and bought flowers and planned dinners, and it was like trying to fill a bathtub with the drain open. How the night before she left, they'd actually had a good evening, a rare one, the three of them. Emma between them on the couch, and he'd gone to bed thinking maybe they were turning a corner. And how he'd come home the next day to the note. You want to know the worst part, he said. The worst part isn't even the leaving. The worst part is, I said thank you. What? When she told me. On the phone later when she finally picked up. I was so trained to keep the peace, to not make it a scene, to be the reasonable one, that when the mother of my child called to confirm she was leaving us for a man she'd met at a conference, I said thank you for letting me know, like she'd rescheduled a dentist appointment. He shook his head against the back of her hair. I've replayed that 1,000 times. All the things I should have said. And what came out was thank you for letting me know. You said it for Emma, Victoria said quietly. What? You didn't say thank you because you're weak. You said it because some part of you knew Emma was in the next room, and you weren't going to let her hear her father come apart. You held your fear so she wouldn't have to. Same as always. Same as tonight. She squeezed his hand. Stop replaying it like it was cowardice. It was the bravest thing in the room. Daniel didn't say anything. He couldn't. Because in 2 years, through a therapist and a divorce lawyer and his mother and every well-meaning friend, not one person had ever put it that way, and the woman he'd hated at 9 o'clock this morning had just handed it to him in the dark, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "How do you do that?" he said rough. "Do what?" "See it. Just see the real thing under the thing. You did it to me twice tonight." "It's the wall," she said simply. "You spend 10 years watching people from behind a wall, you get very, very good at reading them. It's the one gift the fortress gives you. You see everybody clearly because you've stopped being in it with them. It's a lonely kind of clarity. But it's clarity." The fire had burned down to a deep orange glow. Daniel knew he should get up and feed it, and he knew he was down to 3 logs after this one, and he made himself do the math again, and it came out the same ugly way it kept coming out. He shifted, reluctant to leave the warmth they'd built, and eased out from behind her. "Where are you?" "Fire, 2 seconds, stay in the blanket, you'll." He fed a log in, coaxed the flames back up, and the room brightened and warmed a degree, and he counted the wood one more time. 2 logs left. It was 1:45. 4.5 hours of dark minimum and 2 logs. He didn't tell her, but she saw his face when he turned around. "How bad?" she said. "We're gonna make it." "Carter, how bad? Don't do the thing you do with your daughter. I'm not 6. He came back down into the blanket, wrapped it around them both again, took her hands again. 2 logs, he said. Maybe 2 hours of fire. Then it's just us and the blanket and whatever heat we can hold until the sun's up and it warms enough to move. He felt her tense against him. "Hey, look at me." "Well, you can't but listen to me. People survive worse than this every winter with a lot less than we've got. We've got shelter, we've got a blanket, we've got each other, and we've got a fire for 2 more hours to bank as much heat into this room as we can. We're gonna be uncomfortable. We're gonna be miserable, honestly. But we are going to make it to that sunrise, both of us, and we're gonna drive down this mountain, and I'm gonna go home and make terrible pancakes with my daughter. That's not a hope. That's a plan. You hear the difference?" "I hear it." "Say it back." "We're going to make it to the sunrise. Both of us. Both of us." "There you go." And she turned in the blanket, then turned all the way around, so they were face to face for the first time all night, so close he could see the fire moving in her eyes, and the wall wasn't there. It just wasn't there anymore, and Daniel forgot to breathe. "Thank you," Victoria said. "You don't have to." "I'm not thanking you for the fire," she said. "Or the blanket, or the plan." Her voice was very quiet and very steady and completely without a mask. "I'm thanking you for the part where you saw me. All day, I've been the glacier, and the boss, and the woman who read your benefits enrollment, and somewhere in the last 5 hours, I turned back into a person, and I didn't do that. You did that. You've been doing it since you got in the car this morning and told me a beautiful house was a lousy home." A breath. "Nobody's done that in 10 years. I forgot it could even be done." They were very close now. Neither of them moved. "Victoria," Daniel said, and his voice wasn't quite steady. "I have to tell you something, and the timing is terrible. And it's probably the whiskey and the cold and the not sleeping. But if I don't say it now, I'm going to talk myself out of it by morning and go back to pretending, and I'm tired of pretending. I've spent 2 years pretending I don't want anything for myself. I decided I don't get to. I get to be a good dad, and that's the whole allotment. That's all a guy like me gets, and I made my peace with it." "Daniel, let me finish, please." He swallowed. "I walked into that car this morning sure I knew exactly who you were, and I was wrong about every single piece of it. And somewhere around midnight, I stopped being able to lie to myself about the fact that I have noticed you, Victoria, for a lot longer than tonight. Longer than I let myself know. And I'm not saying it because we're freezing and you're the only person here. I'm saying it because we're freezing and you're the only person here, and it made me honest, and I don't get honest very often, so I'm gonna use it while I've got it." The fire popped. Victoria Hale looked at him for a very long time. "You have a daughter who needs you whole," she said finally. "And I have a wall that took 10 years to build, and a track record of choosing people who choose someone else, and I run the company that signs your checks, and there are about 9 reasons this is the worst idea either of us has ever had. I know. I'm not finished. She moved closer an inch, but an inch was everything now. I said there are 9 reasons this is a terrible idea. I didn't say I don't want to. Her hand came up slow and rested against the side of his face, cold fingers against his jaw. I've spent 10 years never wanting anything I couldn't control. And I've spent 5 hours wanting something I can't control at all. And it's you. And it terrifies me more than the cold does, more than my hands not working, more than any of it. And I'm still here. I'm still not moving away. Then don't, Daniel breathed. I'm not. They were a breath apart. The whole night had funneled down to this single point. 6 hours of storm and confession and cold. 2 people who'd carried the same wound in opposite directions for years, finally close enough to feel it in each other, and Daniel started to close the last of the distance. The wind stopped. It just stopped. All at once. The long, low moan that had been the constant floor under the whole night cut out, and the silence that rushed in was so total, so sudden, that they both froze and turned toward the window. The storm had broken, and in the silence, in the dead still ringing quiet where the wind had been, came a sound that did not belong. A low mechanical grinding rumble far off, getting closer. An engine, a big one, coming up the mountain road that no one was supposed to be able to drive tonight. Daniel was up and at the window before he'd decided to move, and through the last drifting flakes, he saw them, headlights high and wide, a snowplow's yellow strobe flashing off the trees, and behind it, a second set of headlights, smaller, a truck coming up the impossible road toward the cabin. "Someone's coming," he said. "Victoria, someone's coming up the road." She was beside him at the glass, the blanket still around her shoulders, staring at the approaching lights. And Daniel watched the truck behind the plow, and something cold that had nothing to do with the storm went through him, because that truck, he knew that truck. He'd seen it in the company lot 100 times. "That's Marcus's truck," Victoria said slowly. "What is Marcus doing driving a plow up a mountain at 2 in the morning?" And then the smaller truck's passenger door opened before it had fully stopped, and a figure jumped down into the snow and started running toward the cabin. And even at that distance, even in the dark, even after 2 years, Daniel Carter knew exactly who it was by the way she moved. It was Rachel. It was Emma's mother. For a second, Daniel couldn't move at all. 2 years he'd imagined running into Rachel again in a grocery store, at a school thing, some ordinary place where he'd be ready. And here she was, instead jumping out of a truck in the middle of a mountain. At 2 in the morning, running toward a cabin she had no business knowing existed, and the only thought that made it all the way through the shock was Emma. He was out the door before Victoria could say his name. The cold hit him like a wall, but he barely felt it, and he came off the porch into the snow in his socks, and he met Rachel halfway across the clearing with the plow's yellow light strobing over both of them. "Emma," he said. "Where's Emma? What happened? Is she—" "She's fine." Rachel grabbed his arms, breathless, her face wet with snow or tears, or both. "Daniel, she's fine. I swear she's home with your mother. She's asleep. The fever broke." "Then what are you doing here?" His voice cracked open, 2 years of held down everything cracking with it. "It's 2 in the morning. You're on a mountain. You scared the life out of me. Because your mother called me." Rachel was crying now. He could see it clearly. Real tears freezing on her face. "Because Emma had a fever, and she was crying for you, and you were stuck up here, and nobody could reach you, and your mother didn't know what else to do, so she called me, and I—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I drove 4 hours, Daniel. I called every county road service until I found one crazy enough to run a plow up here. I've been behind that plow for an hour. I didn't even know if you were alive up here." Daniel stood in the snow chest, heaving, and none of it fit. None of it made sense. The woman who'd left a note on a counter and barely called on birthdays had just driven 4 hours through a blizzard behind a snowplow. "Why?" he said. It came out barely a whisper. "Rachel? Why would you—" "Because I've been a coward for 2 years." She was fully crying now, the words tumbling out fast, like she'd been holding them behind a dam, and the dam had finally gone. Because when your mother called and said Emma was sick and asking for her daddy, and her daddy might be freezing to death on a mountain, I sat in my apartment for about 90 seconds, and I realized I could not live in a world where something happened to you, and the last real thing I ever did was leave a note on a counter. I couldn't do it, Daniel. I couldn't. You made your choice 2 years ago. I know I did. You don't get to... His voice broke. He fought it back down. You don't get to drive up a mountain and cry in the snow and make it about you. Emma cried herself sick tonight because I wasn't there, and the reason I have to work for a boss who drags me up a mountain in the first place is because I'm doing it alone. Rachel, because you left, and now you're here at 2 in the morning and I don't know what you want me to do with this. Behind him, the cabin door had opened. He knew it without turning. He could feel Victoria in the doorway, the blanket still around her shoulders, watching. And he had the sudden sick awareness of exactly what this looked like. His ex-wife weeping in the snow, his boss half wrapped in a blanket in the door of a one-bed cabin at 2 in the morning, and he didn't even have the room in his chest to care. I don't want you to do anything, Rachel said. I'm not here to Daniel. I'm not here to ask for anything back. I lost that. I know I lost that. I'm here because I owed you the truth in person, and I've owed it for 2 years, and tonight I finally got scared enough to pay it. What truth? Rachel wiped her face with the back of a frozen glove. That I was wrong, she said. Not wrong to need something more people are allowed to need things. Wrong about how. Wrong to disappear. Wrong to leave a note instead of a conversation. Wrong to leave her. Daniel. The man I left you for that ended 8 months ago. It ended the way those things end, fast and ugly, and I found myself alone in an apartment I'd blown up my whole life to get to, and I looked around and I understood that I hadn't been running toward anything. I'd been running away from being a person who has to show up every single day and do the hard, boring, unglamorous work of loving people who need you. And you... Her voice failed. She got it back. You just kept showing up, every day. You never got a day off from it. And I used to think that made you small. And I stood in that empty apartment 8 months ago and understood it made you the biggest person I ever knew, and I was too proud and too ashamed to ever say it. Until your mother called tonight and I realized shame is a stupid reason to let someone freeze to death without knowing the truth. It was, Daniel would think later, around 2:15 in the morning when the entire architecture of his last 2 years quietly came apart and rearranged itself into a shape he didn't recognize. Because he had built a story. Everybody builds a story after they get left. It's how you survive it. And his story had a villain in it. A woman who left because she was heartless, who didn't love her own kid, who chose new and exciting and never looked back. And that story had kept him warm and angry and safe for 2 years. And now the villain was standing in the snow, telling him she'd been a coward, not a monster, that she'd been running from the weight of love and not from him. And it was so much more human and so much sadder than the story he'd built that he didn't know where to put it. Rachel, he said, and all the anger had drained out of his voice, leaving only exhaustion. Emma asks about you, not a lot, but she asks. And every time I don't know what to tell her. I know. You broke something in her that I've been gluing back together for 2 years, one day at a time, and I can't. I won't let you come back into her life just to leave again when it gets hard. I won't. She's 6. She's already learned the world can cut her in half. I'm not letting her learn it twice. I'm not asking to come back into her life tonight, Rachel said. I'm not that stupid. I know I don't get to just walk back in. I know it would have to be slow and careful and on your terms and Emma's terms, and I'd have to prove it over years, not words. She took a shaking breath. I'm asking for the door to not be nailed shut. That's all. Not open, just not nailed shut. And I'm asking because I finally figured out that she's worth being brave for, and so are you. And I spent 2 years being a coward, and I'm done. Daniel stood in the snow and felt the cold, finally all of it at once. And he became aware that his socks were soaked and his feet were going numb, and that behind him in the doorway of that cabin was a woman he'd almost kissed 4 minutes ago. And in front of him in the snow was the woman he'd married, and his whole complicated life had followed him up a mountain and was now standing in a clearing at 2 a.m, demanding to be dealt with. "We're not doing this here," he said finally. "It's freezing. You drove 4 hours. There's a plow driver sitting in a truck who probably wants to go home, and I've got frostbite starting in my feet. This is not the conversation, and this is not the place. But—" He held her eyes. "The door's not nailed shut. That's all I can give you tonight. It's not open. But I'm not going to be the reason my daughter never gets to know if her mother figured out how to stay. That's Emma's to have someday, not mine to take. So the door's not nailed shut. We'll talk. When it's daylight and I've slept and I can think, we'll talk." Rachel nodded and closed her eyes, and Daniel saw 2 years of guilt let go of her shoulders just slightly. Just enough. And that was when he turned around. Victoria was in the doorway. She had the blanket pulled tight around her, and she'd been watching all of it, every word carrying clear across the still, dead quiet clearing. Now that the wind was gone and her face was the wall. The wall was all the way back up. The woman who'd held his hand under a blanket 20 minutes ago and told him she was still not moving away was gone. And in her place was the glacier, composed and distant and utterly unreadable. And Daniel felt something drop through him. "We should get down the mountain while the plow's here," Victoria said. Her voice was perfectly level, perfectly professional. "It won't stay clear. Get your things." "Victoria, get your things." "Carter, your daughter needs you home. That's the priority. Everything else can wait." And she turned and went back inside, and the way she said everything else flat closed, filed away, told him she'd put herself firmly in that category. And he stood in the snow between his past and something that had almost been his future, and understood that in the space of 10 minutes, everything had changed twice. The drive down took 2 hours. Marcus drove the plow ahead of them the whole way, and Rachel followed in her truck, and Daniel drove the company SUV with Victoria in the passenger seat, and for the first hour, neither of them said a single word. She looked out the window. He watched the plow's lights. The heater in the car worked, at least the one heater in his life that hadn't failed him tonight. And slowly the feeling came back into his feet, pins and needles, then aching, then just cold. It was almost 4 a.m. when he couldn't stand it anymore. "You went back behind the wall," he said, eyes on the road. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do. 20 minutes before that plow showed up, you had my face in your hand, and you told me you weren't moving away. And the second Rachel showed up, you turned back into the glacier, and you've said maybe 4 words to me since, and every one of them was about logistics. So don't tell me you don't know what I mean." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "Your wife drove 4 hours through a blizzard for you," she said. "Ex-wife. Your ex-wife drove 4 hours through a blizzard behind a snowplow at 2 a.m. to make sure you didn't die. Do you understand what that is, Carter? Do you have any idea? People don't do that. In 10 years, I've never had one single person who would do that for me. Not one. And the woman who broke your heart did it tonight without being asked, which means whatever's over between you two isn't as over as you tell yourself it is. And I am not. I am not going to be the cold cabin thing that happens to a man on the worst night of his life, while the real love of his life is driving a truck 10 feet behind us. That's not what tonight was. You don't know what tonight was. Neither of us do. That's the whole point. You can't tell the difference between real and adrenaline when you're freezing to death. And I taught myself that lesson a long time ago, and I am not unlearning it in a cabin." Her voice was steady, but her hands, he noticed, were pressed flat against her knees, holding still by force. "I told you things tonight I've never told anyone. My mother, David, all of it. And I meant them every word, and that terrifies me. But a person can mean the words and still be wrong about what they add up to. And I would rather go back to being the glacier for the rest of my life than be the mistake you made the night your family tried to come back together." Daniel gripped the wheel. "You don't get to decide that for me," he said quietly. "Somebody has to be the adult about it." "No. See, that's the thing you do, and I watched you do it all night, and I finally understand it. You decide how it ends before it starts, so it can't surprise you. You decided you were empty, so nobody could tell you that you weren't. You decided the wall was safer, so you never had to find out if somebody would stay. And now, you've decided tonight was a mistake, and Rachel's the real thing, and you decided all of it in the 10 minutes since that plow showed up without asking me one single question about what I want. Because if you ask me and I answer, then it's real, and if it's real, it can hurt you. He shook his head. You told me clarity was the one gift the wall gives you. You see everybody clearly. Well, you're not seeing me clearly right now. You're seeing the thing you're afraid of and calling it the truth. Victoria didn't answer. It was almost 4:30 when the plow's lights turned onto the highway, and the road went smooth and salted and ordinary under the tires, and the mountain was behind them, and the city glow started up ahead in the dark. I'm going to reassign you off Whitmore, Victoria said suddenly. Daniel's head snapped toward her. What? Marcus can take it back. It's cleaner. There's a conflict now, obviously, and the professional thing is to remove it. You'll keep your title, your pay, everything. You'll just report to Marcus, and you and I won't have reason to... She stopped, started again. It's the responsible thing. For the firm. For you. For your daughter who needs a father with a stable job and no complications. You're firing me from the account so you don't have to see me. I'm protecting both of us. You're running. Say the true thing at least. You spent all night telling me true things, and now you're 2 miles from home and you're lying to my face. You're not protecting me. You're protecting you, because for about 5 hours in that cabin, you were a person instead of a wall, and it scared you so bad that now you'd rather blow up the best working relationship you've got than risk feeling that again. His voice was rising, and he brought it down hard because they were almost there, and this couldn't be how it ended. I'm not going to let you do it, Victoria. I'm not going to pretend those 5 hours didn't happen just because you got scared when the storm broke. They can't happen, Daniel. And her voice finally cracked just slightly, just at the edge, the first crack since the plow's lights had appeared. That's what you don't understand. Even if every word was real, even if I wanted it more than I've wanted anything in 10 years, I sign your checks. You have a daughter. Your ex-wife is in love with you again, whether you see it or not. And I am a 39-year-old woman who has been left by every single person she ever let close. And I have a company full of people who need me to be the wall, and I cannot. I cannot be someone's beautiful mistake and then run a Monday meeting like it never happened. I'm not built for it. I broke the part of me that could survive that a long time ago. They pulled up outside his building. It was 4:45 in the morning. The plow had peeled off blocks ago. Rachel's truck had pulled in behind them and idled at the curb, her headlights filling the back of the car with light. Daniel put it in park and turned to face her fully. Can I say one thing? He said. And then I'll get out, and I'll go up to my daughter, and I won't fight you on the reassignment, and Monday I'll report to Marcus, and I'll be professional, and I'll never bring it up again if that's what you need. But can I say one thing first? Victoria stared straight ahead through the windshield. Then barely she nodded. You said you'd rather be the glacier for the rest of your life than be my mistake, Daniel said. But here's what you're not seeing, and you see everything, so I need you to see this too. You keep saying everyone who ever got close left you. Your dad checked out. David chose someone else. And you built the wall so it could never happen again. And it worked. It worked perfect. Nobody ever leaves you because you never let anybody arrive. He leaned in just slightly. But that's not safety, Victoria. That's just a slower way to be alone. You didn't beat the thing you were scared of. You just gave it to yourself on purpose so nobody else could hand it to you. And I sat in that cabin tonight and watched the wall come down for 5 hours, and you know what I saw behind it? Not a mistake. Not adrenaline. The best person I've met in 2 years. And she's about to nail herself back up behind that wall because one person from her past showed up and made her scared. And I think if you do it, you'll regret it for the rest of your life, and you'll be too proud to ever say so, exactly like Rachel was for 2 years. You want to know the real reason I let the door stay unnailed for Rachel? Because I watched what 2 years of pride and shame did to her. It ate her alive. And I'd rather leave a door open and get hurt than become a person who nails every door shut and calls it strength. Victoria was crying now, silently. She hadn't made a sound, But the tears were running down her face in the light from Rachel's headlights, and she still hadn't turned to look at him. "Go up to your daughter," she whispered. "Victoria, please, go up to your daughter, Daniel. She waited all night for you. Don't make her wait one more minute because of me." Her voice was shaking apart. "Please, just go." And Daniel Carter looked at her for one more second at the wall she was already rebuilding, brick by desperate brick, at the tears she wouldn't wipe at the woman who'd held his hand under a blanket and told him she wasn't moving away, and was now begging him to be the one who left. And he understood that there was nothing he could say tonight that would win this, that some walls have to come down from the inside or they don't come down at all. So he got out of the car. He stood on the sidewalk in the freezing 5 a.m. dark, and he shut the door, and through the window he saw her put both hands over her face the second she thought he couldn't see her anymore. He made himself turn away. He walked past Rachel's idling truck, and Rachel rolled the window down, and he stopped. "Is she okay?" Rachel asked, nodding at the SUV. "No," Daniel said honestly. "She's not." Rachel looked at him for a long moment, and something moved across her face. Not jealousy, he realized, but recognition, one wounded person seeing another. "You should go to her," Rachel said quietly. "Not tonight, but you should. Whatever that is in that car, I know what it looks like when somebody's terrified of the good thing. I did it to you for 2 years." She swallowed. "Go up to Emma. I'll head home. And Daniel, thank you for not nailing the door shut. I know I don't deserve it." She rolled the window up and pulled away from the curb. And Daniel stood alone on the sidewalk in the dark, his daughter asleep 6 floors above him, his ex-wife's taillights disappearing down the street, and behind him the sound of the company SUV finally slowly pulling away with a woman inside it, who was crying too hard to say goodbye. It was 5 in the morning. The storm was over, and Daniel Carter climbed the stairs to his daughter with the strangest ache he'd ever carried, because he'd survived the cold. He'd made it down the mountain. He'd kept every promise he made, and somehow he'd still lost the thing he hadn't even known he wanted, until the moment it drove away. Upstairs, Emma was asleep on the couch under a blanket, her fever gone, one sock on and one sock missing, and his mother was dozing in the chair beside her. Daniel knelt down and pressed his lips to his daughter's forehead. Cool now, safe now, and Emma stirred without quite waking and murmured, "You didn't disappear." And something in his chest broke clean in half. "No, baby," he whispered. "I never will." But even as he said it, he was thinking about a woman driving away through the last of the snow, alone behind a wall she'd spent 10 years building, who had never in her whole life had one single person refuse to let her disappear. And he knew, kneeling there in the dark at 5 in the morning, that he wasn't done. Not with her. Not by a long way. Monday came the way Mondays always did, whether you were ready or not. Daniel walked into the firm at 8 sharp, and the first thing he saw was the memo. It was already in his inbox, already sent to the whole team, cold and clean and professional, effective immediately. Daniel Carter would report to Marcus Webb on all active projects, including Whitmore. No explanation, no reason given. Just Victoria Hale's signature at the bottom, and the wall behind it exactly as high as she'd promised to build it. He read it 3 times standing at his desk. Then he did the thing he'd told her he would do. He was professional. He forwarded it to Marcus with a note about handoff. He pulled the Whitmore files. He changed the window ratios on the north elevation, like he'd said he would 3 days ago in a car before any of this started, and he did his job. He did his job for exactly 4 hours. At noon, he was standing in the break room holding a coffee he didn't want when Marcus came in, and Marcus looked at him a long moment, and Marcus said, "You know, she came in at 5 this morning." Daniel set the coffee down. "What?" "Victoria. Building was empty. I got here early to catch up on the account she just dumped in my lap with 0 warning, and she was already in her office, and Daniel—" Marcus lowered his voice, glanced at the door. "Man, I've worked for her 4 years. 4 years. I've never seen her look like that. Her eyes were— she'd been crying. Victoria Hale. I didn't even know she could. And she wouldn't say a word about it. She just handed me the Whitmore files and said, "Make it clean." And I said, "Clean how?" And she said, "Just make it so he never has to be in a room with me again." Marcus studied his face. "What happened up on that mountain, Daniel?" And Daniel stood in the break room and understood all at once that he had a choice to make, and that he'd already made it 2 days ago on a sidewalk at 5 in the morning watching a woman cry too hard to say goodbye. "Marcus," he said, "I need you to cover for me for an hour." "Cover for you. Tell anybody who asks I'm on the Whitmore site. Tell them whatever you want." He was already pulling off his badge, already moving. I'll owe you big. But I have to go do something and it can't wait, because if it waits, it'll wait forever. And I watched somebody let a thing wait forever once and it ate her alive for 2 years, and I'm not doing it. Not this time." Marcus looked at him. And then slowly, Marcus smiled the tired, knowing smile of a man who'd worked 4 years for the glacier and had wondered more than once what it would take to melt her. "Go," Marcus said. "I never saw you." Her office was on the top floor, the corner one glass on 2 sides, and Daniel took the stairs because the elevator was too slow, and he came out on the top floor breathing hard, and her assistant looked up in alarm and said, "You can't! She's not taking meetings. She said no interruptions." "I know," Daniel said, and walked straight past the desk and opened the door. Victoria was at her window with her back to him, and she didn't turn around, and she said in a voice like a closed door, "Sandra, I said no." "It's not Sandra." She went completely still. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then slowly she turned, and Daniel saw that Marcus had been right, that under the perfect makeup and the perfect suit and the perfectly composed face, this was a woman who had not slept, who had cried at 5 in the morning in an empty building, who had spent 2 days rebuilding a wall with hands that were clearly exhausted. "You're supposed to be on the Whitmore site," she said. "I'm not on the Whitmore site. You're not supposed to be here, Daniel. That was the entire point. That was what the memo was for, so we wouldn't—" She stopped. Her jaw tightened. "You need to leave, right now, before somebody sees you up here and starts asking questions I can't answer." "No." "Excuse me. I said no." He shut the door behind him. "I did the professional thing all morning. I read your memo. I forwarded it to Marcus. I changed the window ratios. I was gonna do it, Victoria. I was gonna keep my head down and report to Marcus and never bring it up because you asked me to, and I meant it when I said I would. And then I found out you came in at 5 this morning and cried in an empty office, and I couldn't do it anymore. Because a person who's fine doesn't do that. A person who made the responsible decision and feels good about it doesn't come in before dawn to cry where nobody can see. That's none of your— You told me on that mountain," he pushed on, stepping closer, "that the wall was the one thing that gave you clarity. That you see everybody clearly, because you stopped being in it with them. Well, I've spent 2 days seeing you clearly for once, and here's what I see. I see a woman who is not protecting herself. I see a woman who is hurting herself on purpose because she decided a long time ago that hurting herself is safer than letting somebody else do it. And I'm done watching it." Victoria's composure cracked just at the edges, just enough. "You don't understand what's at stake. I run this company. There are 80 people whose jobs depend on me being what alone? Where's the line in your job description that says the CEO has to be miserable? Show me the clause where being the boss means you don't get to be a person." He was close now, close as he'd been in the cabin. "You keep hiding behind the firm like the firm needs you to be a wall. It doesn't. It needs you to be good, and you're the best I've ever worked for, and none of that changes if you let one person in. 80 jobs don't disappear because Victoria Hale finally lets herself be happy. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You're the one making it complicated because complicated is safer than the truth, and the truth is, you're terrified." He took a breath. "You want to know what I did this weekend? After the mountain, I sat with my daughter and I told her the truth about her mom. That her mom made a mistake and got scared and ran away, and that being scared and running away isn't the same as not loving somebody, and that people who love you sometimes get so scared of losing you that they leave first so they can be the one who did the leaving. And my 6-year-old looked at me, and you know what she said? Victoria didn't answer. Her eyes were bright. She said, "That's silly, Daddy. If you love somebody, you should just stay and be brave." Daniel's voice went rough. 6 years old, and she understood in about 4 seconds the thing you and I have spent our whole adult lives running from. If you love somebody, you should just stay and be brave. That's it. That's the whole thing. And I stood in my kitchen looking at my kid, and I thought about you driving away crying in the dark, and I realized I'd been about to do the exact thing Rachel did to me. Get scared of the good thing and run. And I'm not gonna. I refuse. Daniel. Her voice was barely there. Your ex-wife is my ex-wife, and she's Emma's mother, and the door's not nailed shut for Emma's sake, and someday Rachel and I are gonna have to sit down and figure out how to co-parent like adults. But I am not in love with Rachel Victoria. That ended a long time before she ever left. I made my peace with Rachel 2 years ago on a hallway floor, holding my daughter. What I have not made my peace with is standing in a cabin on the best night of my life, finally meeting a person who sees straight through me, who understands the exact shape of the thing I carry, because she carries the same thing, and then letting her convince me it wasn't real because a snowplow showed up at the wrong minute. A tear slipped down her face. She didn't wipe it. It scares me, she whispered. You have no idea how much it scares me. I have exactly as much idea as you do, Daniel said. That's the whole point. I'm not somebody who's going to tell you to just get over the fear. I'm somebody who has the identical fear from the identical wound, and I'm standing here in your office in the middle of a workday telling you I want to be scared with you instead of alone. That's all I'm asking. Not that you tear the wall down all at once, just that you leave one door in it, unlocked, for me. And I'll come through it slow, and I'll prove it takes years, not words, exactly like you said. And I will show up every single day the way I've shown up for my daughter every single day. Because showing up is the one thing I know how to do. It's the only thing I've ever been good at, and I want to show up for you. Victoria put a hand over her mouth. You'd have to meet Emma, she said muffled, and it came out of her like it was torn loose. Eventually. You have a daughter, and I've never Daniel. I don't know how to be that. I don't know the first thing about being that for a child. And Daniel felt his heart lift, because that right there was not the question of a woman who'd decided no. That was the question of a woman who'd already somewhere behind the wall started imagining yes. You held your fear at 12 years old, so your dying mother wouldn't have to see it, he said gently. You have been taking care of somebody smaller and scared since before you were old enough to drive. You already know exactly how to be that. You just aimed it at a wall for 10 years instead of at a person. Aim it at us. Aim it at a kid who only eats terrible pancakes and corrects everybody's grammar and figured out the meaning of bravery at 6 years old. She'd love you. God help me, Victoria. She would love you, because she loves fierce and loyal exactly like her father. And you are the most fierce and loyal person I have ever met. You just spent it all guarding an empty room. Victoria closed her eyes. And Daniel watched the war on her face, 10 years of fortress against 5 hours of truth. The whole architecture of her survival against one man standing in her office, refusing to leave, and he did the only thing left to do. He waited. He didn't push. He didn't fill the silence. He'd learned that from her in the cabin when she'd waited, and let him find his own way to the truth about the note on the counter. So he stood in her office and let her fight it out, and he let the silence hold the space where the answer would go, and he waited for her to jump or not jump. It was the longest 30 seconds of his life. I reassigned you off Whitmore, she finally said, eyes still closed. Because I couldn't sit across a conference table from you and pretend I hadn't told you about my mother, about David, about all of it. I have never told anyone those things. Not my therapist. Not the 2 men I dated in 10 years. Not one living person. And I told you in 5 hours in a freezing cabin because you looked at me like I was a person and not a title. And the second the storm broke, I panicked because I realized I'd handed my whole self to a man I'd known as a person for exactly one night, And every time I've handed my whole self to someone, they've left, Daniel finished quietly. Left. She opened her eyes. And I decided I would rather do it to myself first. Reassign you. Build the wall back. Be the one who left so you couldn't be. A broken sound, half a laugh. You saw it in the car. You said it exactly. I give myself the thing I'm scared of on purpose, so nobody else can hand it to me. You were right. You've been right about everything all night, all weekend. And I have been so busy being terrified that I nearly threw away the only person in a decade who ever bothered to look. So don't, Daniel said. Throw it away, that's all. Just don't. And Victoria Hale, the glacier. The wall. The woman who trusted no one, who'd built a fortress specifically. So this exact moment could never happen, took one step toward him. And then another. And she stopped a foot away close, as the cabin close as the blanket, and she looked up at him with 10 years of fear and 5 hours of hope fighting in her eyes, and she said the truest, hardest, bravest thing she'd said in her whole guarded life. Stay, she whispered. I'm the one who's supposed to be brave enough to say it, so stay. Come through the door. I'll leave it unlocked. I don't know how to do this, and I'm going to be terrible at it, and I'll probably try to run again in a month, and you'll have to talk me down, but stay. Please. I don't want to be the wall anymore. I'm so tired of being the wall. And Daniel Carter closed the last foot of distance that a snowplow had interrupted 3 nights ago on a mountain, and he kissed her. It was not hurried, and it was not adrenaline, and it was not the cold. It was 3 days of clarity, and 2 decades of 2 matching wounds finally meeting in the middle, and she kissed him back with both hands, fisted in his shirt, like she was afraid he'd disappear, and he wrapped his arms around her and held her the way he'd held her under the blanket. Close, sure present, a man who did not disappear, who had never once disappeared, who had built his whole self around being the one who stays. When they finally broke apart, she was crying and laughing at the same time, that same cracked, startled laugh from the cabin, one hand flying up to her mouth like she could catch it and put it back. And this time Daniel reached up and caught her hand before it got there. Don't, he said. Don't put it back. I like the laugh. Let me keep the laugh. You're going to be a problem, she said. I said that in the cabin. I said you were going to be a problem. You did, and you were right. I'm going to be the best problem you ever had. 6 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, Daniel Carter stood in his kitchen and watched the most powerful woman at his firm attempt and badly fail to make terrible pancakes to the exact specifications of a 6-year-old quality control inspector. They're too round, Emma said, arms folded, standing on a step stool at the counter with the gravity of a health inspector shutting down a restaurant. Grandmas are lumpy. These are too good. I'm doing my best, Victoria said, and Daniel had to turn toward the coffee pot so neither of them would see his face, because the CEO of Hale Architecture, the glacier, the woman 80 people were afraid of, was standing at his stove in one of his old flannels, taking detailed pancake feedback from a first grader with total humble seriousness. Do it worse, Emma instructed. How do I do it worse? Just care less about it being good. That, Victoria said, is the single hardest instruction anyone has ever given me. And Emma laughed that bright, unguarded 6-year-old laugh, and Victoria laughed too, the cracked, startled, real one. And Daniel stood at the coffee pot with his back to both of them and pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes for a second, because he had spent 2 years believing a guy like him didn't get this. That the whole allotment was being a good dad and nothing left over for himself. And he had been so completely, beautifully wrong. It wasn't a fairy tale. He wanted to be clear about that in his own head, even in that moment. Victoria still went quiet sometimes and disappeared behind her eyes, and twice. In 6 weeks, she'd tried to pull back to manufacture a reason it couldn't work, and both times he'd done exactly what he promised. He'd talked her down, stayed steady, refused to leave. And both times, she'd come back to the door and found it still open, and him still standing in it. The wall didn't come down all at once. Walls that took 10 years to build never do. It came down 1 brick at a time on Saturday mornings over terrible pancakes in a kitchen that smelled like coffee and burned batter, and something neither of them had let themselves believe in for a very long time. Rachel came by that afternoon, As it happened, the co-parenting was slow and careful and awkward, exactly as promised. The door unlocked, but not flung open, and she stood in the doorway and watched Emma show Victoria how to properly hold a crayon, and something moved across her face, and later at the door she said quietly to Daniel, "She's good with her." "Yeah," Daniel said, "she is. I'm glad." And Rachel meant it. He could tell because she'd done her own long cold work these past weeks, her own reckoning with the thing pride and fear had cost her, and she was becoming slowly someone Emma could count on for the small careful things. "You didn't nail the door shut for me. I don't have the words for what that gave back to me, Daniel. To her. I won't waste it. I promise you I won't waste it." "I know you won't," he said, and found that he believed it. That night, after Emma was asleep, after the terrible pancakes and the crayons and the careful afternoon, Victoria stood at Daniel's window, looking out at the city, and he came up behind her, the way he had under the blanket, back to front, arms around her, and she leaned into him without flinching, which 6 weeks ago would have been impossible. "I keep waiting for it to feel like a mistake," she said quietly. "I've been waiting 6 weeks. Every morning I wake up and I check the way you'd check a sore tooth, and it never does. It just feels like the first thing that's ever felt like mine." "It's not a mistake," Daniel said into her hair. "It was never a mistake. It was just the truth showing up in a snowstorm at the worst possible time, which is pretty much the only time the truth ever shows up." She turned in his arms the way she had in the cabin, face to face, no wall between them at all anymore. And she looked up at him with eyes that had learned slowly over 6 weeks of Saturday mornings how to stay open. "Say the thing," she said. "The thing you said on the mountain, about showing up." "I'm gonna show up," Daniel said. "Every single day. That's the whole promise. Not grand and not perfect and not a fairy tale. Just every day I'm gonna be here. I don't disappear. Ask my daughter. It's the one thing I know how to do." And Victoria Hale, who had lost her mother at 15 and been left at the altar at 29 and built a fortress so complete that no one had touched her heart. In 10 years, laid her head against the chest of a single father who did the dragon voice and kept his promises and refused to let her vanish. And for the first time since she was 12 years old, she let someone else hold the fear so she wouldn't have to carry it alone. The heater had broken on the coldest night of the year in a cabin 9 miles from anywhere, and it had cost them a night of near-freezing terror and confession and everything they'd each spent a lifetime hiding. It was the best thing that ever happened to either of them, and neither Daniel Carter nor Victoria Hale ever spent another cold night alone again.